Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call to order this regularly scheduled Intergovernmental Relations Committee. I'm Andrew Johnson, the chair of the committee, and we are joined today by a quorum of our committee members, including Councilmember Reich, Council Vice President Jenkins, and Councilmember Schrader. We have today before us just one item, our legislative update. Given everything going on during this legislative session, it's a good time for us to check in and get an update on things, both for the public and for the council as well. But before we move on to that, I'm going to recognize Council Vice President Jenkins for a walk-on item, a resolution.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I would like to move a resolution expressing support for Governor Walz's bonding recommendation for the D-Line Bus Rapid Transit, or as it is affectionately known as BRT. Want to just note that yesterday Hennepin County Board passed a very similar resolution, and I think many jurisdictions along the D-line are offering resolutions as well, and we offered a very similar resolution last year, and so we wanted to just update that and bring it forward for 2019, and it states as follows: whereas the D-line will run on Chicago, Emerson, Fremont in a corridor that is currently served by Metro Transit Route 5, and whereas Route 5 is the bus line with the highest ridership in the Metro Transit system, it transports about 16,000 customers each weekday. And whereas during rush hour, Metro Transit reports that Route 5 buses make up less than 2% of the vehicle traffic, but carry more than 20% of the people traveling through the corridor. And whereas the D-Line is a bus rapid transit upgrade to Route 5, connecting the communities of Brooklyn Center, Minneapolis, Richfield, and Bloomington, and whereas the D-Line is projected by Metro Transit to be about 20% faster than Route 5, and whereas by 2030, the D-Line is expected to provide a convenient and comfortable ride to over 23,000 daily transit commuters, and whereas approximately 120,000 people live along the D-Line corridor, and the D-Line would provide frequent, fast, and all-day access to more than 200,000 jobs and healthcare, educational, and other opportunities throughout the corridor and the broader region. And whereas 1 in 4 households living along the D-Line do not have access to an automobile, and many rely on transit to get them between their homes, workplaces, schools, errands, and other activities. And whereas the A-Line, which opened in June 2016, has seen ridership increase along the Snelling Avenue corridor by more than 30% and has driven economic development. And whereas the full cost of the D-Line is $75 million, of which $55 million has already been secured to keep the project advancing, and whereas Governor Tim Walz and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan have proposed investing $20 million in the general obligation bonds in this project, which would keep the D-Line on track for construction to begin in 2020 and for D-Line service to begin in 2022. And whereas transit is a critical component to our region's community prosperity, connecting people with jobs, schools, and opportunity, therefore be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Minneapolis therefore be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Minneapolis expresses its strong support for the D-Line Bus Rapid Transit and urges Minnesota State Legislature to support the governor's $20 million bonding proposal for the D-Line.
Excellent. Thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
I just want to thank the Council Vice President for bringing this up. This is, for all the reasons we just heard about, this is a critical line that's going to connect up all the wards and be really valuable to most of the residents. So thanks.
Thank you. And I'll note for the clerk as well, could we add Councilmember Schrader as an author to this? My apologies to Councilmember Schrader about that. It was a clerical part. I was handling the last draft and forgot to get you on there. So I want to recognize that you've been a great champion for this project and that it runs through your ward as well. And make sure that you're recognizing that too. Excellent. Not seeing any other further discussion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion carries. And we will move on to our legislative updates. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Beverly Turner, and I'm the newest member of Jean Ranieri's Intergovernmental Relations team. The resolution before you that you had just passed was just a great entree into what I'm going to talk about today, because that's part of the bonding package, of course, for the governor, but Representative Hornstein as well has introduced and had heard in the bonding committee a bill that supports rapid bus transit that includes the D-line. You'll be happy to know, and it was heard in Chair Murphy's committee and laid over for consideration in the main bonding bill. So happy to report on that. But I will begin at the beginning of the overview. Legislative deadlines. The second committee deadline is coming on Friday, and that means there's a flurry of activity for all the policy bills to be out of both the House and Senate committees. After Friday, they will begin working on their finance bills, their omnibus finance bills, and they have 2 weeks starting next Monday for their markup and their presentations of those bills. And the House released their targets for the bills this past week. You'll be happy to note that there's $26 million in additional funding for housing. And there's a very healthy proposal for bonding as well, which is if you could just skip to the next, 1.6 million, which is above what the governor is proposing. So healthy bonding bill. All of the city's priorities have been heard in the House Bonding Committee. There's been a flurry of activity in the House, and as you will note, a common theme running through our presentation today, you'll see that the House has been very busy and very active. The Senate, not so much. They have not heard as many bills as the House. It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds as they get into conference committees and where they might be tucking additional provisions, possibly in omnibus finance bills to come. The Senate Bonding Committee has not held any hearings at all to date. So we expect the House will put together their bill, and then it'll be included in negotiations with the Senate as to the size of that particular bill. As I had stated, all of the city priorities have been heard to date. Upper Harbor Terminal, the mayor made a presentation to the committee and was well received. The storm tunnel presentation was made, as well as the Emergency Facilities and Training Center was also heard and laid over for consideration in the House bonding bill. On the housing front, as I had indicated, there's $26 million in the House target that was released this week. Senate targets are due out tomorrow. They'll be holding a press conference. The governor's proposal was $27 million in additional spending. Again, the House has been very active, hearing many housing bills. Of particular interest was a bill that they heard this morning, which is the Omnibus Housing Policy Bill, and that will include 2 of the landlord-tenant provisions that we have been actively engaged in supporting. One is on Representative Noor bill, which provides for specifying the unit that a tenant will be living in, as well as the same notice periods for landlords and tenants for notice to quit the premises or increase in rent, so there's a mutuality. That was amended into the bill this morning. Another bill that's somewhat more controversial and that's getting a lot more opposition heard from is Representative Hassan's bill, another landlord-tenant bill that's being considered this evening in the same committee for the policy bill as an amendment onto it, and that provides for expungement, evictions, and provides for more criteria for discretionary standards for expungement of eviction actions, and also provides for public access, prohibition of public access while the evictions are pending. After they have actually been entered into the record in the court, then they would be accessible to the public. Other provisions in the bill that would be of interest, there's some low-income housing tax credit provisions that were stricken last year that are being reinstated that allows the MHFA to provide for criteria in low-income housing tax credit development projects. There's a 30-year affordability requirement provision that was Representative Hornstein bill that requires that MHFA residential rental property developments must have a 30-year affordability provision. And that's kind of the highlights of the housing policy bill. The Senate is hearing their Senate housing policy bill this afternoon. Both bills include some provisions that amend the Minnesota Bond Allocation Act. You might be familiar with the Haven proposal from last year that had been advanced. The bond provisions that are in this bill are actually the consensus group provisions that came out of those discussions, so that there was an advocates group and a stakeholders group, and all of the 5 consensus items are in the House bill. 3 were in the Senate bill. That's being heard this afternoon in the Senate. There is a more problematic provision in the Senate bill, which provides for the challenge program, which the city of Minneapolis uses and supports. There is a provision that would limit that program to workforce housing only and student housing. Basically would require that occupants of the housing would have to work 30 or more hours a week or be a full-time student in an accredited secondary institution. This we find very problematic. It not only potentially violates the Fair Housing Discrimination Act, but also would prohibit us from the use of this type of program for the types of projects that we do use it for. So we are actively engaged in working to delete that from the bill as well. I'm sure it will go to conference and we'll be able to have a bigger say in it, in the resolution of that. Moving on to local government aids. There have been several proposals that are on the table right now. The tax bill will be presented and marked up in the next couple of weeks. So I'm kind of putting on my crystal ball here insofar as, but just giving you the lay of the land as it now stands. The governor's proposal provides for a $30 million increase in LGA, but there would be no formula change. And the city stands to benefit by a $2.8 million increase. The Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities bill provides also for a $30 million increase with the formula adjustment, and we would have a greater bump of a $3.5 million increase to the city of Minneapolis. There's also a bill by Republican Representative Hertas. It's his own idea, a $1.8 million increase the city of Minneapolis would see. Again, it's a $30 million increase overall with a formula adjustment. The Senate is taking a different tack. The chair of the committee has introduced and heard a bill that would benefit cities of 5,000 population or less, and it's a direct additional $15 million for those cities. On the lodging tax, both the Senate and the House have heard the lodging tax cap. The Senate provides for an increase in the limit from 13% to 13.875%. The House completely repeals the cap. And we have language in the offing in case the governor's metro tax proposal goes forward. We have an amendment to propose that would exempt that increase from the lodging tax cap so that it won't interfere with that. On the TIF front, Upper Harbor Terminal will be having a hearing in the Senate Tax Committee for authorization for the TIF district for Upper Harbor Terminal on Tuesday. That's a bill carried by Senator Champion. It has been heard in the House, and it's championed by Representative Lee. On the pensions front, the MRF bill was heard last night, the amendment to the pensions bill, and basically provides for a decrease in local government contributions of going from 31 million to 21 million. Minneapolis's contribution would go from 18 million to 13 million, and the state's share would go up to 20 million. That was passed by unanimous vote on amendment last night in the Pensions Committee, and the full bill will be heard next week for final passage. And I also think you heard about this before, but the para bill that amends expands the policy and fire relief funds and decreases the contribution there. That was already an amendment that was in the bill, and that's going forward as well. One additional item to note just on taxes. This came up kind of late in the process. There's a bill, and it was heard in the Senate committee and laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus, affects 4D property, which is low-income rental property. And that particular bill, currently in law, it stands that 4D property is treated at a 0.75% rate for the first 100,000 in property value, and then it goes down to 0.25% for every dollar increased over that 100,000. The bill proposes to change that to a flat rate across the board of 2.5%. So it would be a significant decrease in low-income rental property units. It does have an impact on the city, and we are currently looking at and analyzing what it would, it's a negative impact, obviously, on revenue. And that was heard by the Senate and laid over. And I will now turn it over, unless you want questions on this part or you want Allison to present for the second half.
Any questions from committee members? Not seeing any. I'll also recognize we've been joined by Councilmember Orsami. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to my team member.
Thanks, Bev. Good afternoon, Chair Johnson, members of the committee. My name is Allison Nessie with our city's Intergovernmental Relations team. I will be going over updates around transportation, public safety, public health, and then just our miscellaneous policy bucket that we have been tracking and working on. So around transportation, since session started in January, the House Transportation Committee has been conducting overviews of the Department of Transportation and the Met Council. They've also been doing a lot of field hearings across the state, including one here at North High School. As far as legislative updates around transportation, the work is really just beginning. I do want to note that the distracted driving bill, which has received a lot of press, which would allow only hands-free devices while driving, passed out of both the House and the Senate chambers. Transportation, both road infrastructure and transit, are high priorities for Governor Walz. The governor has proposed a comprehensive transportation package that includes a 20-cent gas tax, bonding, a transit sales tax for the metro area only, and various fee increases. It also includes an increase into municipal state aid. The governor's transportation package was heard last Thursday in the House Transportation Committee, and a Senate hearing is still yet to be determined, which, as Bev stated, will be a common theme throughout all of our updates. The speed limits bill, which has been a high priority for the city, grants cities of the first class the ability to raise or lower speed limits. It had a hearing in the House Transportation Committee the evening of Thursday the 14th, and actually was heard in the Senate just this morning. Right before I came over here. I just want to give kudos to our public works staff. They've been excellent on this in both coordinating, testifying, and it's just a good example of working together. We have also worked with St. Paul, Rochester, and Duluth on this, and I actually am hopeful about seeing this move forward. A bill around transportation network companies has yet to be introduced, and at this point, we do not believe it will be an issue during this session. All right, so public safety. Our fines and fees bill, which you may recall from our efforts last year, have been both heard in their necessary House committees and will hopefully be included in 2 committee omnibus packages. We have yet to have hearings for either of their Senate companions. I would like to note, though, that these issues were included in what has been referred to as last year's omnibus prime bill, which included almost multiple committees, but was inevitably eventually vetoed. But we did make it to the finish line last year, and even with a different makeup of the legislature, so we are hopeful to be successful again this year. Around gun safety, 2 bills have been introduced and heard in the House, House File 8 and House File 9. House File 8 would require criminal background checks upon the transfer of a firearm, and House File 9 would allow law enforcement or family members to petition a court to prohibit a person that poses a significant threat to themselves or others by possessing a firearm. House File 8 does have a Senate companion, or does not, I'm sorry. And House File 9, Senate companion, Senate File 436, was referred to the Judiciary Committee and is in the Senate and is awaiting a hearing. Around police reform, a bill that would establish a task force to study the laws, rules, contracts, and policies that govern the employer-employee relationship between political subdivisions and police officers was introduced on March 13th. It has yet to have a hearing in the House and has no companion in the Senate, but if it gains traction this year or next, it's something we'll be watching as it would impact us. Public health. Our asthma bill that our public health department has been working on for, I want to say, the past 6 years. It establishes an enhanced asthma care services benefit for those receiving medical assistance and expands medical assistance to cover the cost of products that reduce asthma triggers within the home. It was heard in the Health and Human Services Policy Committee on March 15th, and it actually has its second hearing in Health and Human Services Finance Committee tonight. Its Senate companion is awaiting a hearing. Around opioids, the opioid package, which includes a registration fee, advisory council, response account, and the House version includes addiction prevention, education, intervention, treatment, and recovery provisions, passed out of the House floor this past Monday night. Its Senate companion passed out of its last committee stop yesterday, so it is headed to the Senate floor and will go to conference to create a final. But it's a great improvement after what happened last year, which ended up to be nothing. So. Around policies, these are a list of various policies that, again, we've been working on and following closely and that support our agenda. House 5012 prohibits the practice of conversion therapy with children or vulnerable adults. It prohibits medical assistance coverage and prohibits the misrepresentation of conversion therapy services or products. It was heard in 2 committees and referred to the House floor. Its Senate companion is awaiting a hearing. The driver's licenses for all bill, House File 1500, has made its way through 4 House committees and is currently on the House floor. We anticipate it will be scheduled to be heard in the House floor in early April. At this time, it still has no Senate companion. So House File 40 addresses restoring the right to vote for persons convicted of a felony upon release from incarceration or upon sentencing if no incarceration is imposed. Its Senate companion is waiting a hearing. A bill permitting cities to adopt a stretch and energy program was heard on March 14th in the Energy Committee and is included in the House Energy and Climate Omnibus Package. Its companion in the Senate was introduced on March 21st and is awaiting a hearing in the Jobs Committee. House File 1956, the Clean Energy First Act, establishes or would require electric utilities to meet their resource needs using clean energy resources, and states that electricity generating utilities' energy proportion from renewable resources must be increased and sets target dates and goals that must be achieved. It updates the state energy savings policy goal and establishes the Conservation Improvement Program Modernization Act of 2019. Plastic bags, I think we're all familiar that the plastic bags were banned last year, but there is a bill, House File 511, which proposes to repeal the ban on plastic bags. The bill was heard in 2 House committees and is currently awaiting on the House floor. And my last update on cannabis, House File 717 would establish a task force to advise the legislature on legal and policy issues associated with legalization, taxation, and regulation of cannabis production. It has been heard in 3 committees and returned to Ways and Means. Its companion, Senate File 897, has been referred to the Judiciary Committee and is awaiting a hearing. Senate File 619, also cannabis related, addresses recreational legalization. And it was heard in the Senate on March 11th, but it failed on a vote 6-3, so it didn't advance out of committee. Its House companion is House File 420, and it has yet to be heard. And with that bit of irony, I will leave it here, and am happy to stand for any questions.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Schrader.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank you for the work. I know it's been tough with not having as many people and having a challenging and new system. I also really appreciated the deep dive into kind of a lot of the housing updates for the bills. I really want to thank you for your work on the stretch code. That's a really exciting one for the city to be able to kind of meet some of our sustainability goals as we kind of build and grow the city. Also, just on thanks for working on banning the ban. I think as the news just keeps getting worse and worse on climate change, and we need to be very real about the change we need to see. Finally, I did want to get kind of an update on House File 40, just to see some of this, if there is Senate sponsorship. I know I used to work on that bill, and I know it's been around for a long time, and the Senate champions are still there on the Republican side, so I just wanted to see if there had been any movement on that.
I don't know off the top of my head,
Oh,
not
that's
to
fine.
my knowledge, but, the restoring, the voting restoration.
Oh, the restoration of the right to vote. I believe that's a Senator Champion bill, and he has not been granted a hearing in the Senate. So there's still hope, though. Carlos Mariani is very interested in that, and he heard the bill. That was the potential for inclusion in their omnibus bill.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other committee members? All right. Oh, yes.
One more update, and that was a really good segue. Our team has put together a smart sheet of the 60-some bills that we're working on and tracking, and we'll be sharing that link with the committee members. And we'll update it in real time. So, because again, being slightly short-staffed, but just making sure that we're communicating and getting those updates to you guys in real time. So that would be included on there.
Excellent. Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. I'm just curious, who's carrying House File 420 in the House?
Representative Freiberg from Golden Valley.
All right, thank you.
Excellent. All right. Seeing no further comments or questions, I really appreciate the presentation, all the work going on at the legislature. It certainly feels like night versus day difference compared to last session, and so we're glad to see all the activity, particularly in the House and from the governor's office, and so many different important priorities moving forward, and just very appreciative of our staff and all the work you do on these issues. So I will go ahead and move that this presentation be received and filed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The motion carries. And with that, we have no further business. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.